opened the earth, rocking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts.
Good afternoon, and as always, welcome back. Imperialism, a policy or practice of extending a nation's power and influence, often through military force or economic domination, or over other territories or nations. President Trump has threatened to retake the Panama Canal. He's threatening to annex Greenland. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has issued a stark warning that Washington intends to intervene militarily if Venezuela were to take action to defend its territorial claims. How dangerous is it for a dying empire to threaten greater expansion? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze these events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is Trump threatening more military expansion and intervention, along with initiating trade wars. How concerned should we be? Well, my guest is a leader of the Organization for the Victory of the People based in Guyana. He's an executive member of the Caribbean chapter of the Network for the Defense of Humanity and the Caribbean Pan-African Network, or CPAN. He's Dr. Gerald Perreira. Gerald, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your program.
It's always an honor and a pleasure when you join me. Before we get to imperialism, I want to get your take on this. Columbia University's president is replaced as Trump threatens approximately $400 million in university federal funding. He's threatening $9 billion in Harvard University funding over anti-Semitism. I see this as a direct attack on intellectualism, knowing that fascists attack intellectuals or academia first, and also tying this to protecting against anti-Semitism, I believe is in fact anti-Semitic and is really just a cover. Your thoughts?
You're right. The Zionists and their supporters have always accused those who attack or criticize Zionism and the state of Israel for its racist and apartheid policy as anti-Semitic. And if you really look at the history of that area, I mean, the Arabs are Semitic people, and the Jews, these so-called Jews, who occupy the state of Israel, they are not if you really look at it from the biblical perspective as well as the anthropological perspective, they are not the Jews of biblical times. But having said that, definitely what you pointed out, that what Trump is doing is an attack on intellectualism and all progressive academia. That's what he's doing. Activists who have participated in pro-Palestine demonstrations and so are being, their visas are being revoked and they're being expelled. I think only a couple of days ago, Mamadou Tal, who is a Gambian citizen, decided that before they deport him, he was going to leave the country voluntarily. I know many who are being sent back. But this is what we are seeing, is those of us who understand fascism, and this is what you call naked fascism. The fascism has always been there and embedded in the United States political, in the state apparatus, in the institutions of the United States. And one of the things that liberals need to understand is that fascism is part of the liberal ideology. Those of us, if you look at the between the 1930s and 1940s, that is when the term liberal democracy, which is a contradiction in terms, was used. It was the first time it really gained any sort of traction, and they were using it. The Western countries were using the term as to separate themselves from the Axis powers that they were referring to as totalitarian regimes. So no one should be surprised that what you're seeing today with what Trump is doing, it was there. It was there. It was embedded as part of the United States. George Jackson, when he wrote his book in 1972, it was published, Blood in My Eyes. Blood in My Eye, he referred to the US as fascist. But many Marxists, many Orthodox Marxists did not agree with that because they saw fascism. They were looking at fascism in the Comintern perspective, that fascism was just an aberration that was, when capitalism was in crisis, you'll see the ugly face it will. That is part of it. But it has always been there. And if you look at the history of Europe and what led to the run up to the so-called Second World War, Britain and other countries in Europe were quite happy to appease Hitler. They even offered Hitler, Chamberlain offered Hitler some of British territory in Africa for peace in Europe. Yes. Yeah. So they didn't mind. But while that was going on, when the war started, American big business were oiling the Nazi state military machine. You know that there's a book written by a Jew called Trading with the Enemy. It shows that the American big business, the military industrial, were supporting Hitler, and George Bush,
correct,
their father George Prescott, was a Nazi banker,
right?
So what I'm saying is, what Trump is doing, Trump is just the naked and most ignorant and warmongering face of this underbelly of liberal fascism.
Rumination with Andrew. Let's be clear, this started under the liberals. Biden started censoring universities, but
correct.
Rumination, we got to be even clearer than that, because it was Lynn Cheney during the George W. Bush administration through the Heritage Foundation that was attacking scholars and deporting scholars who she believed to be challenging the imperialist American narrative. So there's plenty of blame to go around, and the reason, Dr. Perreira, that I started with this, because I see the imperialism that I mentioned in the open and this fascism that we are also experiencing through the Trump administration to be tangentially related. Your thoughts?
Yes, you're right. And thanks for your clarity there. You're absolutely right. They are related. Um, im, one of the characteristics of fascism is some of the two main characteristics is it's racism and it's warmongering.
Mm-hmm.
And what the United States is doing or has been doing for a long time is no different from what Mussolini did in Libya or in Ethiopia, and what Hitler did in across Europe. You know, there's you know there's that interconnection. So you can't. But you see, a lot of progressive uh, people still don't really grasp the nature of fascism. Be- they see fascism when you talk about fascism, they think right away of Hitler, Mussolini, and maybe Pinochet in Chile and so. But when you point out that this is present in the so-called liberal democracies, they're at a loss, but it's there. It's there. And we've seen over the decades, so-called liberal democracies have supported fascistic and racist regimes. The United States supported the apartheid regime, the fascist regime in South Africa, the Boer regime. They supported Ian Smith when uh, when it was Rhodesia. They supported it. They supported Pinochet. They supported this they supported the slaughter, the destruction, the overthrow of Ahmed Sukarno in Indonesia, when thousands of communists, over 800,000 communists, were slaughtered. Almost a million. The gutters were running with blood. You know, they they did this throughout the world. They have even supported they've supported fascistic groups that were involved in terrorism, like the bombing of the Bologna train bombing that happened years ago in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
The Air Cubana, we'll come to that. The Air Cubana bombing in 1976 that claimed the lives of almost, I think it was 70 Cubans. The entire Cuban fencing team, national fencing team, was wiped
Mm-hmm.
out. 11 Guyanese died, perished in that. And I think 5 North Koreans, and died in that time. So they have a history of supporting the United States government regime. There's this history of supporting and working with fascist groups to overthrow progressive regimes or get rid of leaders and regimes that they're opposed to. Today, they're supporting, and I don't like the term, I don't ever use this term, Islamo-fascist, or
Mm-hmm.
Christian fascism, this contradiction, because there's nothing about the revolutionary message of Jesus Christ that can be linked with fascism, or the revolutionary message of Prophet Muhammad that can be linked with the heretics who are in Syria, who have who in the Zionists are bombing Syria, and they've never, not one shot was fired at the Zionists, but they are being used against the resistance, the resistance in Lebanon, and against the resistance in Yemen. And the Western powers are facilitating the movement of these religious or these Islamic heretics. They're facilitating their
Mm-hmm.
movement into the Sahel countries to destabilize the revolutionary governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And they are these Islamic heretics were able to ambush a convoy of Malian troops and Russian advisors and kill a number of them with full intelligence and intelligence support, and the use of satellites and so, with the coordination of the fascist regime, the neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine. And
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine came out and said that they assisted them. So we're seeing seen a convergence. There's this convergence of neo-Nazis, Islamic heretics, the Christian, so-called the lunatics in the Christian fundamental, the fundamental
Fundamentalists.
churches.
Uh-huh.
There's this convergence, and they're all, despite all the contradictions, they work together. They're working together to help Trump and even the regime to retool, and that's what Trump is doing, to retool the empire.
And let me add, see if I can add connect one more dot here, and that would be what they call the Trump's PayPal mafia, with Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, David Sacker, and Raoul Botha. Am I right to connect those racist South African dots to what you've just articulated?
Definitely. What is interesting is, and ridiculous, is Elon Musk called for Julius Malema. He wants Julius Malema, the head of the economic freedom fighters, to be declared as a terrorist and to be brought before the International Criminal Court. Could you imagine that? This man is a representative of a regime that is supporting genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. And the US regime, the fascist regime, Trump fascist regime, threatened judges of the International Criminal Court, threatened them, sanctioned them. You saw what they do to Duterte of the Philippines. And Trump, the United States and Israel, ride roughshod. They ignore international law. And Trump and Elon Musk wants Julius Malema to be brought before the ICC. And what's Malema's crime? For saying that it is time that the African people of Azania, the right name of South Africa, the right name of South Africa, be given, that their land that was taken away by the Boers, that the land should be given back to them. And Trump turned and said, oh, there's a lot of bad things happening in South Africa, you know. So what is bad is because you have black faces in high places. The ANC government is up, but the economy, most of the land is still in the hands of the Boers. And it tells, Brother Leon, I just want to say something here.
Sure.
I always argue, I don't believe that any race is superior to the other. So, but
in fact, race itself is an artificial construct.
Yeah.
That is not it has never been able to be proven or defended through any biological means. It's an artificial construct created by Europeans to justify enslavement and oppression.
That's right. But I absolutely, that's my position. I agree with you. But I just want to say this. You know, when I look, I have never, if for want of definition, I've never seen, if you look, I've seen many cases in countries, I've even seen it in my own countries all over. Africans are a very forgiving people.
Yes.
I would say this without any playing. I find Africans are morally superior. I'll tell you what I mean here.
Okay.
I can recall when they had the Truth Commission, and Desmond Tutu was the chairperson for it. There were African parents who came before the Truth Commission, and you had some boards, some policemen, military officials who tortured people, killed them, buried them, and they couldn't find. And parents got up and said, just tell us where you buried them. You know, we just want closure to this, and you forgive them. You're forgiven. And you would not find that the other way around. Mandela, look at how Mandela was treated, and yet came out and spoke about forgiveness and a rainbow coalition. And since we run Mandela, Do you know, look at when Mandela became the president of South Africa. And it was at least about 25 years after the US still had his name on the terrorist list. There was one South African vice president who came to the UN to address the UN, and he was held at the airport because his name was on the, the so-called the terrorist list. So we are dealing with a very, people who are very immoral, who are unforgiving, who, and I'm being very specific here, when I look at the history of the Anglo-Saxon peoples, and the US came out of Britain, and that's why the Russians, I don't know if you follow carefully, the Russian officials keep referring to the West as Anglo-Saxon.
Yes.
And one Russian official, I think is Maria, the spokeswoman, said,
yes,
she said, you Anglo-Saxons only, you like to solve problems by war. And the Russians keep referring to these as the Anglo-Saxons because the word slave was from the Slavic.
Yes.
Yeah. So they saw Hitler and the Nazis, and all of them saw the Slavic people as inferior. And
wait a minute, to that point, I think this has gone by a lot of people. I've made the point a number of times. Well, a lot of people in the West see the conflict in Ukraine as white people fighting white people. And I tell them, no, you got to understand, the Europeans do not see the Russians as white or European.
Correct.
They see them as Slavic, hence the word slave.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. Oh, you're absolutely right. And that's important. That's important. I'll tell you why. Two things. First of all, as Walter Rodney, the great Guyanese historian, scholar, so from Walter Rodney, in his book, not only in How Europe on to Develop Africa, but in Groundings with My Brothers, Rodney was always specific. He kept referring to the West European countries because he pointed out that Russia and the East European countries were never part of the colonial project,
right?
And genocide and seizing the lands of the so-called New World. That was a West European project in the 15 states, the 30 states then in the United States, Denmark, France, Portugal, Spain, Holland, Germany. These were the countries that committed colonial genocide and then were engaged in land theft and the theft of resources to build their countries and economies. No ship ever left Russia or what was known as Yugoslavia or that area or China and went to Africa and captured Africans, take them to build it. That was not. And this is also important. Do you know when Menelik, he was fighting the Italians, the rule of Ethiopia then?
Ethiopia, yeah.
Yeah, he dispatched some messengers. He sent 3 envoys to Russia.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Tsar. Yeah, to the Tsar for assistance. And the Tsar, Russia sent some mounted guns, a number of mounted guns, about 100 mounted guns to Ethiopia. And I think some volunteers went. So you had some Russian volunteers and weaponry went to help Ethiopia. And you know, what was that solidarity based on? The Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church have the same teachings, right?
Wow.
So Russia came to the assistance of Ethiopia because both of them were Orthodox Christians and they were opposed to the Roman Catholic Italy. So
see,
that's
I've been to that point also been trying to get people to understand that if you look at, because a lot of people ask the question, why is the United States, why historically has the United States been so angry and vehemently opposed to Russia? And I tell them, well, it's a matter of imperialism versus anti-imperialism.
That's right.
If you put it at its very basic elements, it's Russia has been anti-imperialist. Look at their support in the
That's
African freedom struggle.
Yes, correct. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell you something that much attention is not paid to. Do you know that one of the reasons that the West and America's bought into it, one of the reasons that the West European countries hate Russia is this? Do you know that at the time of the so-called First World War, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and the present King of Britain, his grandfather, George V, were all first cousins. By relation through Queen Victoria. Because Queen Victoria, relatives were all from Christian.
Germany.
Yeah.
She was from Germany.
She was married to Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha from Germany, right? And Britain England at one time had a German king, George I, who didn't even speak English. They brought him and put him on the throne. But there is this connection, right, with Denmark and everything. But Tsar Nicholas II, who the Bolshevik Revolution and Lenin and Trotsky and them got rid of, he was a distant relative of Queen Victoria of Britain.
Doesn't it even go further back to Queen Charlotte?
Yes.
In Germany?
That's right. Yeah.
Who was the first black queen? In Britain.
But yeah, that's right. That's right. But the thing is, the Tsar's wife, Alexandra, was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria.
Okay.
So when the Bolshevik Revolution came and they got rid of the Tsar and he was killed and the royal family was killed, one was missing, was never able to say what happened to her. So the West European countries got together and they had this animosity towards Russia because just after the Bolshevik Revolution, 16 European countries invaded Russia to help the counter-revolutionary forces. So that animosity against Russia has been there, and they have never accepted Russia as part of what you call Europe as such. Yeah. And it go on. And then, as you pointed out, in the liberation struggles, you know, even when it was the Soviet Union, now Russia's always stood with the struggles in Mozambique and the frontline states, the people of the Sahari, Republic of Sahara, and all those countries. Russia, actually, there is a university that was established many years ago that Russia established in the name of, it's named the Patrice Lumumba Friendship University. And I know many Guyanese who had scholarships and went there many years ago. People who would not have been able, because of their family background, coming from poor families, were not able to get a scholarship to go to Britain. And they went to there, and many students from Africa, Asia, and the Americas went there to study. You know, and people don't remember this. The first black man that was launched into space was a black Cuban by the name of Armando Tamayo. He was the Cuban when the Russians were sending some cosmonauts into space, and they asked Cuba. They took an Air Force pilot from Cuba and prepared him, and he was the first black man to be sent to space, and that was the Russian thing. So this happened. These are things long before from the United States, but these are things people don't. They don't know. And Russia supported the liberation struggles in Africa when the United States was supporting Rhodesia and supporting South Africa. And I just want to mention this quickly, that, I was in South Africa in 2001 at the World Conference Against Racism. And Fidel Castro spoke at the stadium. The stadium was packed. And Castro said that when the Cubans were fighting, when the Cubans were in the battlefield, he said they had to adjust their military tactics because South Africa was going to use nuclear weapons, limited nuclear strikes on the Cuban troops and the liberation forces, and they had with the full knowledge of the West, and it was approved.
Wow.
So, and that is why when South Africa already had the nuclear weapons, and when they had the transition,
right,
when the ANC was entering power, the Americans and the British told Mandela and the ANC, in this transition, you will have to give up the nuclear weapons that the South Africans already had. So it's okay for white nations to have nuclear weapons so they can nuke non-white peoples, but nuclear weapons should not be in the hands of non-white peoples.
When I opened this conversation, I was talking about Venezuela and Essequibo.
Yeah.
So we have Rubio, Lil Marco Rubio, warning, following that Venezuelans warning reports of the illegal operations. This is how Orinoco Tribune describes it: the illegal operations of Exxon Mobil operated ships in the disputed Essequibo waters, and this was discovered by a Coast Guard patrol several weeks ago. What's going on? What's going on here? And is this merely the United States operating at the behest of Exxon and for the interests of Exxon Mobil?
Definitely. Brother Leon, let me tell you our position in the OVP and what I've been saying for a long time. Venezuela is our neighbor, and that is one dynamic that we will not be able to change. And the way forward is for Guyana and Venezuela to talk, to have dialogue, and to go back to the Geneva Agreement, where there's mechanism there because Guyana has official authority over the Essequibo. This territorial thing has always been used, which I pointed out many times, by the United States against any government the US is hostile to, whether that government happens to be in Venezuela at the time or in Guyana. Because if you look at it, the United States historically supported Venezuela. The United States supported Venezuela. I can recall we had a president by the name of Forbes Burnham. And Burnham, when the Cuban troops were going to fight in Angola, the Cuban aircraft would stop in Barbados and refuel. And that was under Errol Barrow, who's the prime minister then of Barbados. And the US put down a lot of pressure on Barbados. And because, Barbados caved in because of the tourist industry and all that, Barbados gave in. So Burnham picked up the slack and said that the Cuban troops can refuel in Guyana. And even some Guyanese, in a very secret arrangement, some Guyanese soldiers went and joined the Cubans in the fight to get the battle experience. And when the United States found out that Guyana was doing that, they threatened to bomb the airport in Guyana. And at the same time, the United States was pushing Venezuela to start a war with Guyana. The United States sold F-16 fighter planes to Venezuela to be used against Guyana. And President Burnham launched the People's Militia under the motto, every citizen a soldier. And I was part of that. I was involved in that, that we will be prepared. But the US was pushing it. Now there is a regime in Venezuela that the US does not like. And because they kicked out Exxon, because what Exxon was doing in Venezuela, Exxon is doing exactly the same thing now in Guyana. Guyana was a big sugar producing country. We still produce. So we used to call it Booker Guyana. Bookers, right? Now it's Exxon Guyana. Exxon is like a state within Guyana. And Rubio came in. Rubio and these, and Maduro referred to him as a imbecile, and he came into Guyana. And the way Rubio behaved, was like the governor. And here was the president of Guyana standing next to this man. And this is the problem with the present crop of Caribbean leaders, with the exception of the Mia Motleys in Barbados, and the Ralph Gonzalez in St. Vincent, and the odd one and two others. But Jamaica and Guyana are captured states. They're just satellites, outposts. It's clear for imperialism. So Rubio comes into Guyana and talks like Guyana is a colony of the United States. First, he said Guyana is one of the most exciting places to be in the world, and that the US is committed to transformative change. Those were his words. He is coming in, they're coming in because to plunder the oil and gas wealth. That is what they're there for. And he said that if Venezuela believes it can attack Guyana or Exxon, it would be a bad day for Venezuela. That is what he said.
Now, has there been any indication from Venezuela that they have any interest in attacking Guyana?
No. There are many Guyanese, and I believe this, and I've always argued this. Venezuela would never attack Guyana. Now, let's look at it this way. Why would the Bolivarian Revolution, Venezuela has been under sanction for a very long time. Why would Maduro and the Venezuelan government want to attack Guyana when that is exactly what the US would want. So Maduro said to President Ali, let's talk. And Ali said, no. Now, I would put my head on a block that the people who told Ali to say no are the Americans and the British.
The same way that Putin and Zelensky reached an agreement 2 months after the conflict started.
Correct.
And the United States sent in Boris Johnson to tell Zelensky no.
That's right. Well, it's the same thing playing out in Guyana. It's the same thing.
Because, now, wait a minute. Now, let me ask one more thing on this very thing, because I'll connect this. First of all, Sahar, thank you. Hotep, thank you very much for that super sticker. Greatly appreciate it. Because what I find consistent with the Trump administration language is they make all of these assertions, or they talk about preventing something that nobody has talked about happening. So they say, well, we have to protect Taiwan because we know China wants to invade Taiwan. Well, can you provide me any evidence of such? Has President Xi said we're going to attack Taiwan?
That's right.
No. When J.D. Vance was in Greenland, J.D. Vance says, well, we know that China wants to take Greenland.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever said that? No. Can you provide any evidence that China has its eyes set on Greenland? No. So when Rubio says, if Venezuela were to ever, who is saying that Venezuela? So
you're right.
I need
That's
to connect those dots. Go ahead.
No. Yep, you're right. It's just President Ali met with Maduro in the St. Vincent, a meeting that was organized by Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves and some others,
Mm-hmm.
and they signed the Argyle Agreement. Ali boarded the plane, and I can tell you, before the plane landed in Guyana, a British warship was heading to
Mm-hmm.
Guyana.
Yes.
You know, that didn't look good, you know, that a British warship heading to
Mm-hmm.
Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
And it is clear Prime Minister Gonsalves and some other leaders said that when they were arranging the Argyle meeting, pressure was being put on them by a number of countries that would include Britain, the UK, the US, and certain EU countries,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that that meeting didn't happen. Because you see, what they want is this. Venezuela has the world's largest reserve of oil and
Correct.
gas.
More than Saudi Arabia.
That's right. So what they want to do is to put a military base in Guyana, if they don't already have some secret base. I think the Venezuelans know what they're talking about there. So the idea is to come in under this rules that you're protecting your Exxon and protecting, and you come to defend Guyana. When they would like, what they're going to do is to set up their base in Guyana and then use it to launch an attack against Venezuela. And then they will occupy both countries, right? Which would be difficult to do. I don't think the US can
No.
launch a war, send troops into Venezuela and sustain
No.
it.
No.
It's not. They're going to be in for a big fight.
That's
big fight.
That's urban. That's urban warfare.
Yeah,
At a whole nother level.
that's right.
If you could just quickly, finish your thought and then.
Yeah. So, you know, that is what they want to do, and then they will keep the military base permanently in the two countries, or at least in Guyana. You saw what they did in Syria. The US went in there and they've been looting the gas and all out of Syria, which is illegal. And they're in Iraq. And four times the Iraqi parliament, there were resolutions passed in the Iraqi parliament asking the Americans to leave, and they would not leave Iraq. And you have the Popular Mobilization Brigade every now and then throwing missiles at their bases, and the fight is going on. But once they are there, they're not going to leave. So what we are facing here in Guyana is a real fight for our sovereignty, because I can tell you what we have, we're not independent, we're not sovereign. That's on paper.
Mm-hmm.
That's on paper. But what the other thing about Rubio, what he did, he was on his way to when he was going back, he was on, there's this new highway that opened, and they named it Heroes Highway, after a group of senior military officers who were on board a helicopter, and the helicopter crashed. This happened more than 2 years ago, and they said they sent the black box to the US. Up to now, no one can hear anything, and there's all sorts of theories going about.
Mm-hmm.
But he said when he was traveling on the highway, on this new highway, he said it was so bumpy that he had his head was, he was hitting his head was hitting the top of the vehicle and all of that, and that he said that is the type of road the Chinese built. The Chinese never built that road. That road was built by 3 local contractors. But and the president stood up there and said nothing. And the Chinese are putting up a bridge across the Demerara River, an amazing piece of civil engineering. And I have 2 very good friends who are structural and civil engineers, and they said it's amazing. But he took a dig at the Chinese and actually telling us who we should trade with. So pressure is being put on Guyana to break and to minimize not they just minimize, but to break with the Chinese. And also they're putting pressure on the CARICOM countries to get rid of the Cuban medical brigades. And Mia Motley said if she got to lose her visa, so be it. You know, Rowley in Trinidad said the same thing. I can tell you, Brother Leon, had it not been for the Cuban Medical Brigade, our health system in Guyana would have collapsed a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It would have collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
People, I know people go to Cuba for medical treatment,
Oh, yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Poor people, you get a family member, the Cubans are around it. The Cubans said, just buy your ticket and
Mm-hmm.
go. The minute you reach it, the ambulance pick you up, they take you free of charge. People who had eye problems fixed.
Mm-hmm.
I know of a top sculptor who went to the UK, and the surgeon, the eye surgeon, or that couldn't do it. He said, we can't help you with this, it's gone too far. And he was taken there by a former minister, and this surgeon was meant to be the queen, looked after the eyes, you know, the doctor for the Queen of England then. And do you know it was rectified? The Cubans said, look, don't travel from Guyana to Cuba. Just go across the Suriname. And they provided the name of a Cuban at Surinamese who trained in Cuba, and he did it. This is what Cuba, with all the pressure, sanctions, you know. I went to Cuba 5 times. Cuba, you can walk, you can send your daughter on the road at 3 o'clock in the morning, and not one finger will be laid on her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's amazing. Medical care. It's a human right, not a commodity to be regulated by market forces. And they want to they're putting pressure on Guyana.
In fact, they're trying to get the Cuban doctors out of Haiti.
Yes, out of Haiti, out of Jamaica, all the CARICOM countries.
Mm-hmm.
And Rubio is beating the war drums against not only Venezuela, but against Nicaragua, right? And Cuba. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is what people need to know. You know, in October, the month of October, we will commemorate this. And it's low-key now in Guyana. In 1976, an aircraft left Georgetown, Air Cubana 455, with Cuban teachers, some nurses and doctors, as well as the entire Cuban fencing team that was killed. Mm-hmm. 11 Guyanese were going to Cuba to study medicine. And there were four North Korean citizens, I think, diplomats who were returning to the DPRK. And that plane was bombed. The bomb was placed on board a flight in Trinidad. Hello?
Yes.
Yes, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
The bomb was placed on board the flight when it was in Trinidad. And the plane blew up late over Barbados. But this is what happened, and I just want to share this with you and your listeners. You know, I attended a forum at the Caville campus of the University of West Indies about 3 years ago in Barbados. 4 years ago, and Prime Minister Ralph Gonzalez read a statement, and he had the documents, and it's well established. The men who placed the bomb on that plane, when they arrived in Barbados, the timer was in place, and so when they arrived in Barbados, they checked in at a particular hotel. The name of the hotel is provided. On arriving at the hotel, the first call they made was to the U.S. Embassy. That was the first call they made.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then they left and they went from the hotel to the U.S. Embassy. Just a minute. They went to the U.S. Embassy and they held a meeting there. Then they went back to the hotel. On returning to the hotel, they checked out from that hotel, went to another hotel in Barbados, and then later left. And the plane blew up later off the coast of Barbados, killing everyone aboard.
Mm-hmm.
The men who organized that bombing, Luis Posada Corrales and Orlando Bosch,
mm-hmm.
both based in Miami, carried out that act of terrorism with the full knowledge of the FBI and the CIA.
Correct.
These people, they had bombed the Cubana Airways office in Panama. There was an attempted, they bombed the Guyanese embassy in Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
And Guyana and Cuba sought the extradition of North Korea, the extradition of these guys, and the US protected them. They lived, and then both of them died naturally in the United States.
In Miami.
In Miami. And they were behind this. One, Freddie Lugo, one of the men who planted the bomb, was arrested, and he went to prison. They imprisoned him for just a few into Venezuela, and then he disappeared. They said he escaped from a maximum security prison because Andres Perez, the social democratic so-called president of Venezuela, who was a CIA asset, cooperated with them in releasing him. So these people have a history of supporting terrorism. And Rubio comes in. Rubio, who is a Cuban background, and he knows this. And then you're coming to tell us who have been the victims of terrorism, right? About Cuba and Venezuela, as well as Nicaragua, 3 governments that have never, ever sponsored any act of terrorism, you know? And the other thing, I don't know if you've noticed this, they're saying that, oh, the people that they're deported, do you know of all the countries that make up Central America, the people who are leaving those countries and going to the United States, few are coming from Nicaragua. The majority are coming from El Salvador and Guatemala. In fact, the economy in Nicaragua is growing. The social housing, the improvement, the roads that they built with the Chinese.
The
Nicaragua has more
they're food self-sufficient now.
Yeah, Nicaragua, it's amazing. I know people who are working in Nicaragua. I know some people who gone there as accountants and so working with the cooperatives, helping with the organic farming and so. And Nicaragua, the healthcare, it's amazing. It's amazing what they've been able to achieve. And you know, I mean, and you're singling out Nicaragua.
Right.
And
Socialism is working in Nicaragua.
It is.
And that's the problem.
It is. But I'm glad you mentioned that because, you know, brother, we've always said this. If, you know, the West, the imperialists and the apologists like to say, oh, socialism don't work. So we say, okay, then why you spend billions of dollars
undermining it?
To undermine it. Just leave it, let it collapse on its own volition. Why don't you do that? You know, and my argument for socialism, apart from its socio and economic structure, so is the ethical aspect. When I go to the Gospels, I see the moral and ethical dimension of socialism there. I see it there. You know, I see it in the Quran and in the teachings of the prophets. It's there. It's there. You know, I just want to share this quickly with you. You know the story with Ananias and his wife?
No.
Yeah. Ananias and his wife, they said, you know, they brought the wealth and placed it at the feet of his disciples, and they distributed because on the basis of need. But they said Ananias and his wife kept back a portion and lied about it. And both lied, and then they collapsed. They were struck down and they died. So the apologists for capitalism and so the ignorant fundamentalists, they say, oh, you know why they died and why they were punished? Because some of the things they held on to, like the jewelry and so, belonged to pagan people, and it was not the right thing to do. No. You know why they were punished? Because they were keeping a portion for themselves so that they would be above the others. Right? Today, in political economy or sociology, we call it capital accumulation. Right? They didn't want an equitable distribution. They said if we keep back a portion, we will be more at an economic, more advantageous position than the others. So what I'm showing you is the radical communism to use that in small c's. I'm not talking about the Soviet communist or the radical socialism of the Gospels. You know, and the whole thing, the book is filled with it.
Equitable redistribution of wealth.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, and this is what we try to point out to Christians and Muslims. You cannot say that you're a follower of Christ. You cannot say you're a follower of Prophet Muhammad. Right? Or even the Buddha. And that's why you have what is called the Buddhist socialism in the US school. When you read and study these works, it rejects capitalism. You know, Ludwig von Mises, a big defender of capitalism. He said for capitalism to triumph globally, it can only be done if Christianity is out of its way. Von Mises said that. Because he understood that. So the argument is, when we get back, you know, there was the role. What we are fighting today is, I believe, and this is our position, all the progressive forces, irrespective of our confession, you know, whether we're influenced by the liberation theology, revolutionary teachings of the prophet, whether you're Marxist, communist, we have one thing in common: to abolish capitalism, end poverty, yes, eradicate poverty, and imperialism. And that is what we have to build unity around, what we have in common, rather than bothering with the mind differences. And Kwame Nkrumah pointed that out in Consciencism, in his book Consciencism. You know, so it is there. It is there. And we have to mobilize all these forces in the struggle against this stage of where we say this fascist / imperialism of the U.S. empire.
Can you stay with me for about another 10 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Because I want to get your take on this whole deportation issue to El Salvador. The two things I want to touch on. One is El Salvador, and then I want to get your take on Trump wanting to bomb Iran. So the Trump administration is now admitting, has to admit that one of the men sent to extradited to El Salvador, or deported to El Salvador. Deported is the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Yeah. Deported to El Salvador, was sent there by mistake. That he actually is a legal American resident who, his name is Kilmar Armando Abrigo Garcia, lives in the U.S. with his wife and his children, and that he was a legal American resident, should not have been deported. And now the United States is saying, well, he's there now. He's in prison. He's out of our hands. We have no control over this. But so I want to get your take on that. But in this context, I believe, this is my opinion, that this whole deportation to El Salvador has a lot less to do with deporting immigrants and has a whole lot more to do as being a trial balloon, as the United States wants to send American prisoners eventually to a place like El Salvador. Your thoughts?
I cannot disagree with you. It's interesting that you raised that. Before I get back to that, let me give you an example of what happened. David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister of Britain, he visited Jamaica, and he said in Jamaica that the issue of reparations is off the board. Britain is not going to give reparations. He said that. He said, what we will be doing is to help the government of Jamaica to build a prison so that they can send back the Jamaicans who are serving their sentences in the UK back to Jamaica. He said that. And nobody said anything other than myself. I wrote a very lengthy article that was published all over. And David Commichong, the chairperson of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, who is Barbados ambassador to CARICOM, we came out putting Cameron in his place, and he came to Guyana. And, we have a lot of people who are Pan-Africanists on paper, but when it comes to standing up to these people, they're cowards because they don't want their visas to be revoked or what. But this is what they're doing. I don't know if you heard about the Windbush generation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know that many Jamaicans and people from the Caribbean who were born in the UK were sent home?
Yes.
And their properties are there now. They're sitting idle. They don't know what they're going to do with it. But while they're sending back these people, they're allowing East Europeans and the Ukrainians. A friend of mine who's a journalist.
Wait a minute. But before you get to the East Ukrainians, the Windbush generation Jamaicans, they worked in Britain damn near their entire lives.
Yes,
they earned their retirement.
Yeah. And many fought, many joined the volunteer forces that fought for the British in against. Yes, and they're sending them back. And a friend was telling me, he said Ukrainian refugees are being put up in hotels in Canada, and across the region, those who are held are being put in detention camps. And the whole thing about sending back these people to El Salvador, I agree with you. That is what they're going to do. I think they're going to. It's part of this whole thing about making America great again. It's all about making America the white. It's all about that. I think it's it's to kick out. You'll see those who are being deported. Those students who are being sent back, they're either they're Africans, Arabs, and others, and so they're being sent back.
As Donald Trump talked about,
I think they want. You're right. It's like going to be used like something like Guantanamo. Because
when Rubio, a couple things. One, I don't think it's an accident that Donald Trump attacks birthright citizenship in the United States, and when that's not even questionable. I mean, there's even no rational basis for challenging that. I think one of the elements of that was birthright citizenship is what made our ancestors American.
Right. Yeah.
So if you challenge birthright citizenship, trying to carve out a way to, I think he didn't make this point, but I think the extension of his argument was going to be that some of us aren't American citizens.
Yeah.
And using that as the premise or the pretext to start talking about sending us, if Americans start to revolt to these repressive economic strategies that he's implementing, there's going to be an awful lot of unrest in the United States.
Yeah.
And
I believe.
Go ahead.
I believe you're heading for. I believe the U.S. is heading maybe for the second civil war.
And he's going to need to send these people someplace.
Yeah.
And so when the president of El Salvador says to Rubio, when Rubio was there, when he says, you can send your prisoners here.
Yeah.
And Rubio says, nobody ever made that offer. We'll think about that. And final point on this, because now the America's saying, well, the guys over there now, we can't do nothing about it. No, you can. Send Marco Rubio to go get him.
Yeah.
It's very simple. Marco, get on Air Force 2, take your silly behind to El Salvador, and go get the guy. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all you gotta do. And Carol, thank you so much for your I need a 2-hour show. Thank you, Carol. I greatly with guests like this.
I would be surprised, and part of the sinister plan is if they would use some of those people as a bargain to promise them certain incentives and so to organize them as a contra force and to create problems Nicaragua.
Okay. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. there's something sinister at work here. But I just want to share this with you and your viewers,
Yes.
which is very important. I'm showing you how the empire is really going after you. You know, I traveled recently, and I spoke. There were 2 demonstrations in Guyana in support of the Palestinian cause. And the first demonstration had like about 1,500 people participated. There were huge Palestinian flags, and so big march through the city. And then the second one drew maybe 800. I spoke at the first rally, and the Israeli ambassador to Guyana, the one who's accredited to Guyana, but he's non-resident, he's not based in Guyana, he wrote a lengthy article when the Al-Aqsa flood happened, and he circulated it throughout the Caribbean, the media houses in the Caribbean, and it was full of lies and fiction. And I did a lengthy reply to him, which was published throughout the region, calling him out for his lies and so. And I spoke at that rally. And when I was traveling, something happened to me that never happened before. When I got to the airport, when I was leaving Georgetown to board the British Airways flight to London, the counter staff at the British Airways office told me, they said, Mr. Perreira, there's a problem. I said, what problem is it? They said, it's not a British Airways problem. They're saying that you cannot board the flight. I said, they who? They said the US or the control. I said, but I'm not going to the US. My flight is leaving Georgetown. It's making a stop in St. Lucia. Nobody's coming off. It's just stopping and passengers will come aboard and straight to the UK. So they said, okay, they'll check back. So they called. And they said, well, Mr. Perreira, well, the US, they don't give me transit visas. Many places I go, I get harassed. And so because of what I've written about what they did in Libya, I write a lot exposing all these heretical. But so they called the border, US border thing and so on. They said, no, I cannot go on the plane. And they said, but he's not going to the US. The plane is not going. They said, no, but he's flying over US territory. That's what they said. You know what's the territory? The US Virgin Islands. The aircraft is passing over. So I said, what? I'm going to parachute out into the Virgin Islands. So I had to go back and get another. That's what they did. And then they told the counter staff in Georgetown, if you put him on the plane, we will prevent the flight from leaving Georgetown. Well, it's an honor for me because Sekou Touré said something. He said, if the enemy is not bothering with you, then you're doing nothing. He said, but if the enemy is bothering with you, irrespective of how your size, then you got to be saying something. And I'm in good company, man. I'm in good company. But and the US Virgin Islands used to be the Danish West Indies. And the US had purchased it from Denmark for about $20-something million in those days, years back. So maybe Denmark might sell them Greenland.
Well, hey, Kevin Baptiste, thank you for that $10 super sticker. Excellent show. Hey, man, it's guests like this that make it that way. Final question for you. And that has to do with Donald Trump seems to be hell-bent on attacking Iran, which would be, I think, of all the dumb things he's done so far, that would be, and I'll use my improper grammar here, more dumber than, I mean, that would just be insanity. Your thoughts?
Now, I think, Trump, you listen to Trump. Trump is, I'm going to use strong language. Trump is an absolute ignoramus. He is. He is. You listen to these guys, they don't understand the world. They don't know the world. Iran, Trump is a bully. When the question was posed to him about what will happen and the world, he said, I don't care. That's what he said. Now, Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Libya. Iran has been preparing for this ever since the war with
Correct.
Iraq for a
Correct.
long time.
Correct.
And I don't think he's going to go ahead with it because I think Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are going to put pressure on him, because a war with Iran is going to inflame the whole region and send the world into a nosedive, into a dive, because Iran is going to unleash its nuclear weaponry. Iran is going to unleash what it has against the military bases in the Gulf states,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to hit Israel.
Oh,
Iran has some sophisticated
very,
weaponry, and
very.
Iran has not even, the Iranians are very, very clever in things. So he can go ahead and threaten, but you're not going to achieve, because it's going to destroy the entire region. Israel will not survive, and their allies in the Gulf states are not going to survive. And Iran is a huge country. It's a huge country, and Iran, this the support, it's going to the conflict, the Houthis. I'm wary of this thing. It's such nonsense about Iran, the Houthis and
Mm-hmm.
Hezbollah, and them being proxies of Iran. And the Americans have a right to support terrorists and whoever they want, but the other side is not, has no right to support anybody. But I just want to say this quickly about this whole thing about threatening Iran. As I said, it's not going to be nice. I don't believe that. I know Hezbollah is wounded, but I don't think they're wounded in the way that the West
Mm-hmm.
is putting it over. I think
Yeah.
they know what they're doing. They're forcing the Lebanese army to go. You go and bear some of the brunt because you stood by and did nothing. And the Houthis are strong. They're not going to.
Oh,
Yemen is a big country. They're not going to break the Houthis, and this thing is going to escalate. I think Trump, with all his bravado and bullying, is going to step back from Iran, telling Iran if they don't reach a deal, then they'll face the alternative, which is to bomb them. I don't think. But uh, these guys, you don't know their mindset. The empire's going down. The West Europeans countries are in decline. Their economies are in bad shape. In fact, some activists in the UK are telling me that the soup kitchens and people, the amount of the increase in poverty and people who are collecting food and so from the shelters and handouts has increased tremendously. So they're all in a bad shape. The German economy is in a bad shape.
mm-hmm.
And they thought that they would have been able to bring Russia to its knees, but Russia's strong. Russia is strong.
And like Iran, Russia has been preparing for this for
That's
a
right.
very long time.
That's right. That's right.
This is and final point, and then I'll let you go. I really appreciate your time today. This is something that I don't think in the West, at least as far as the media is concerned, that they really articulated, is as it relates to Ukraine. This is exactly the kind of war of attrition that Russia has been preparing for 15 or 20 years. They've just been stockpiling artillery for exactly this kind of event. And the United States, I think, played right into their hands. The United States is fighting the kind of conflict that they were the most prepared for in the place where they're most prepared to do it.
Yeah, you're right. And brother, I want to thank you for the clarity you bring. So this
thank you.
The way you sit in your analysis, what you said. And I can say to those people who see this as a war between two white, that's a twisted perspective, and it's dangerous. When you listen to the leader of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore,
Yes.
and what he said. I mean, it's one thing, Kwame Ture used to say to us, don't waste time with people who are not in organization and involved in struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Kwame Ture said that.
Mm-hmm.
He said, let them go and join an organization, even if it's to do some community, set up a soup kitchen, but get in an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Because, rather than sit in a porch and trying to interpret the world. And if you listen to Ibrahim Traore and what they're doing, and Russia, the grain that Russia has allowed, they've sent to thing. This is fundamentally, this is a war between people, countries, nations fighting for liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And those who want to maintain the old status quo of domination, neocolonialism in one way or the other. And look at what, since the three countries in the Sahel came together, touch one, touch all.
Mm-hmm.
The French and all of them, they've lined up and they're working with groups such as the Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, in the Islamic Maghreb, and working with ISIS to destabilize these countries. Have you ever thought about it, brother? Look in Nigeria. If you look at Boko Haram, look at the vehicles that they use, Toyota pickups, the weaponry. Where all these Toyota money for these Toyota pickups are coming from? When you look at some of the groups in the Sahel and the weaponry they have, where is it? But before we go quickly, I just want to say this to you because it was, I can't remember if I ever mentioned this to you before, but it's always important to sometimes bring these back. I mentioned to you what happened to me when I was traveling. 100 Trinidadians had left. There were those who were captured or defunct were sent back to Trinidad, and they're working with them. Some Muslim groups are working with them to somehow deprogram them. Do you know 100 Trinidadians left Trinidad and went into Syria to fight for the Islamic State? 100. And some of these Muslims were people, some of them had, criminal records. And so before they reverted to Islam, no problem. Malcolm X was that, Malcolm X, that's not what we're saying here. But 100, and they traveled to Britain, to the UK, and then from the UK to Turkey, and then took bus from Turkey into Syria. And they were not on the radar. But I am on the radar.
And I am on the radar.
And you're on the radar because we just speaking truth to the powers that be. And the point is, somebody, agency or so, or nation facilitated the movement of these people. A Turkish guy, he's Kurd really, he told me that in that part, these people, some of them, when they went into the cafes and they had huge wads of US dollars. Where did they get this money from? And they went by bus into Turkey to fight for ISIL.
They got this. They got the money. They got the money from the same place the current president of Syria got his money when he came out of the U.S. prison camp.
Well said. Well said.
It's the same bag of money.
That's right.
It's also the same bag of money that James Earl Ray used after he assassinated Dr. King.
That's right.
Somehow was arrested in London on his way to, where was he going? I can't remember. Where was he going? South Africa. He was on his way to South Africa.
Yeah.
And they arrested him. How did he get from assassinating Dr. King in Memphis to London?
Yeah.
Same bag of money.
But Coretta Scott King, some colleagues told me that Coretta Scott King, he told Coretta Scott King on his dying, when he was dying, he made a confession. He said, I did not kill your husband.
Yes.
So, it's the same old the deep state. But, people are confused, those who don't understand. What we are seeing in the United States with all this thing is the American ruling class is divided.
Very much so.
The American ruling class is divided, on the way forward. So you have, they're in crisis. So you have the Elon Musk and them who were not traditionally part of that group, but when you look at this talk about the deep state, and then you go back to the book, The Power Elite by C. Wright Mills, that he wrote so many years ago about that nexus between the government, big business, and the military. Wright Mills. And then there is the book, a very good Herbert Aptheker. You remember Herbert Aptheker?
Yes.
He was a big, an American historian, a man who was denied tenure, the position in U.S. University. He wrote a book called Democracy, Freedom, and the State. Very good work exposing the thing. And but as we said, you're talking today about fascism and liberal democracy and how it binds in. I mean, you had Francis Fukuyama and Doyle telling you that the U.S. was a liberal democracy as far back as 70-something. In 1790, when they took the first census, they had 685,000 enslaved Africans. And then when they
were a liberal democracy.
That's right. And in 80-something, when they did the next census, you had 4 million enslaved. So tell me what's democratic about that, and by your definition was so liberal. So, it's...
Dr. Gerald Perreira, thank you so much, my brother. So much for your time. And in fact, next time I bring it back, let's focus on the Sahel states, the alliance of the Sahel states, and what that means going forward.
Yeah. Thank you very much, brother. And I just want to remind you, as a believer, your work, what you're doing is sacred activism.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
It's sacred. It's sacred.
Thank you.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.
Yeah. Peace.
Sarah
Anytime,
Hotep,
brother.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah Hotep, thank you very much for that $10 super sticker. Carol Absaram, thank you for that $2 super sticker. Thank you all so much, because every contribution helps. We are doing this for you, but we can't do this without you. Dr. Gerald Perreira, that brother is just special. And I am just so humbled that he creates the time to join us as he does. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New episode tomorrow. One of my favorite people on the planet, Dr. Radhika Desai, will join us tomorrow. There you go.
That's a good sister. That's a good sister.
She's going to join us. Thank you, man. She's going to join us tomorrow. Please follow and subscribe. Please leave a review, folks. We need you to subscribe. We need those subscriptions to get us as close to 10,000 as possible. Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. Remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.